Hi, folks. How's it going today? Welcome to Quarantine Coffee Hour. I'm your host, Derek Pratt, the educator here at the Erie Canal Museum. We've got a special guest today, David Brooks from Schoharie Crossing State Historic Park, here to talk about the environmental impact of the canal. So that should be pretty neat. We'll give people a few minutes to log on, start watching. In the meantime, I'll just say a few things. You might notice not wearing a Hawaiian shirt today, repping my Syracuse Salt Potatoes jersey, our minor league baseball team, which sadly we can't watch any minor league baseball these days, but you can watch me talk about baseball and the history of it in Central New York on Friends of Schoharie Crossing's YouTube page. So I'd really suggest checking that out. Also, please say hello in the comments. Let us know where you're from. Also in the comments as we go forward, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in and we'll get them to David as soon as we can. As is tradition here, go over my local coffee. Got Cafe Kubal today, locally produced. One of their sites is right on the former canal, now Erie Boulevard in Syracuse. It's in my Chittenango Landing Canal Boat Museum mug because I noticed, David, in your paper, your essay that you wrote, which I highly suggest people check out. It's in the description of this video. You cite Dr. Robert Hager, who was the founder of Chittenango Landing Canal Boat Museum. He wrote an interesting book on Mohawk River boats. So anyway, looks like we're starting to get some people in. A few more little things to note for the Erie Canal Museum. We're going to start opening up soon. So this will be our final quarantine coffee hour for a while. We plan on having more, but they will be less frequent. We'll get you a plan on that soon. Be sure to follow us on Facebook for all that. And we're going to start having historic walking tours of downtown. We will still have virtual programming though too. Next Saturday, in almost a related topic to today's environmental impact, it falls under the umbrella of science, which for me as a history guy, they're all in there together. Dr. David Spinagle from Worcester Polytechnic Institute is going to be talking about Amos Eaton and DeWitt Clinton, which was a book he wrote that looks at how the building of the Erie Canal really helped Americans understand the natural sciences, so geology, that sort of thing, a lot better. So Dr. Spinagle teaches at WPI. Amos Eaton founded RPI, the first engineering school in American history. That will be Saturday, July 25th. You have to register ahead of time on our website, and you can watch it on Zoom. But anyway, enough about me and the Erie Canal Museum. I'll send it over to you, David.
Thanks, Derek. I appreciate that. I'm going to pull up my screen here and share that.
And we've got Janet is listening from Glasgow, Scotland, I believe.
Very nice.
Go Celtic. I hope.
We're going international. I love that.
Yes, and we've got some people watching in central Pennsylvania and others in central New York. So
great. And you can see my screen just fine?
Yes.
Very good. And I want to thank the Erie Canal Museum and Derek in particular for offering me this opportunity to talk with everyone. Derek did a great program on baseball. Again, you can go on Friends of Schoharie Crossing YouTube to check that out. And it's kind of sad to hear this might be one of the last regularly scheduled quarantine coffee hours. So I like to be included in this. I know you've gone through a lot of fantastic presentations So being included in that is an honor. Just a couple of quick things about Schoharie Crossing that Derek mentions. The Erie Canal Museum will be opening up soon. Schoharie Crossing will be opening up our visitor center again in the coming week, but by appointment only. So if this topic interests you or you haven't been to the site and want to check it out, give us a call in the next few days or in the next few weeks even to schedule an appointment to stop by the visitor center. Our grounds are open from sunrise to sunset every day. So even if you don't want to stop in the visitor center, come check us out. If you're in the Syracuse area, it's only a short couple hours drive, but it might be a little bit further if you're coming from Glasgow. So when you're able to do that, we will welcome you. So in this presentation, through the mire, I'll look at the environmental history of the Erie Canal. I had put together as sort of well, back in my college days, actually. I had done some research on it and decided to turn it into more of an article and then a presentation when I started working at Schoharie Crossing. So we'll get started with that. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about Schoharie Crossing, as it was noted back in the 1950s as the most logical site for an Erie Canal Restoration Museum. And that was a lot to do with the Fort Hunter Canal Society. After those of you that may not be aware, the Erie Canal crossed through and then over the Schoharie Creek and over it by use of an aqueduct. So shortly after, the aqueduct had lost a couple of arches due to flood control, and it was no longer being used for the Erie Canal. It really started what was the Fort Hunter Canal Society for the preservation of the canal features through the hamlet of Fort Hunter, which is in the town of Florida, Montgomery County in New York. And because some of those structures still were part of possessions of New York State and were being used, it was obvious that New York State would become involved in the project of creating a canal museum. And Schoharie Crossing opened up as a state historic site in 1966 underneath Governor Rockefeller. It's over 200 acres and stretches over 3 miles from the town of Glen through the town of Florida. And it's the only place where you can witness all 3 of the major phases of the Erie Canal in one location. There are other places that will feature portions of the original Clinton's Ditch. We'll have plenty of places that showcase portions of the enlarged Erie Canal, or you can go along today's modern barge canal. You know, as I'll mention, that's the baby canal at only about 100 years old, the young one. But this is the only place where really all 3 of those major phases are very evident in the landscape. And to start, here's a quote: "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over." Hopefully some of you will recognize that, and I think it's a good place for us to start. It's from Genesis. And I start off this presentation that way because we really kind of have to put ourselves in the mindset of people a couple hundred years ago, particularly post-American Revolution. You're starting to get into this new Great Awakening, this religious view toward life. You know, not so much as what will really particularly happen after the canal opens to the burnt over district, but you know, just having that concept of what people looked at and how they viewed the environment or nature, their surroundings leading into the building of the canal. We kind of have to start off by putting ourselves in that mindset. And the reason I mention that is, and you might recognize the figure down here as well, New York State also has a geological advantage. So people of New York are saying to themselves at this point that God has given us this geological advantage, this cut through the Mohawk Valley, to improve upon. To have dominion over nature. We can create an artificial river, and that is us adhering to God's will. There's a lot of other, you know, political and economic reasons behind it as well. But as far as the natural world and people's connections to it, that plays a role, as well as, you know, you look at the geological advantage and it seems obvious to people that, you know, it is placed there because they are meant to improve upon it. And some of those geological facts, you can really want to dive into that. Go back into one of the Quarantine Coffee Hours with Tom Grasso and watch that. Derek and Tom had a great discussion about that, that really explains why New York State has those geological advantages. There's a lot of canal projects, you know, that I we'll bring up occasionally what I call the Virginia conspiracy amongst people like Madison and Jefferson and Washington, who are trying to build a canal through Virginia that don't have the same geological advantage. They don't have the same entrance into the interior of the continent like New York would. And if you'll notice from here, there's a couple of name drops here: Amos Eden, Ebenezer Evans, these men that would go on, as Derek mentioned, to start RPI. I give them a little bit more of a commentary in a different program I do, but when I talk with fourth graders in particular, I ask them if they want me to start at the beginning of the history of the Erie Canal, and they kind of give me this funny look, and I say, millions of years ago. And they give me a really funny look, because you have to look at the impact of the canal going forward is also because of those geological advantages. We have a creation of limestone in New York State because it was underwater. Thousands of years ago during those glacier episodes, you have the formation of the mountain ranges, you have the glacier dam that will eventually let loose and create the Mohawk Valley. And so all of that past, natural occurrences, freezing and thawing, the creation of stone, all of those are going to be impacted later on, or cause or give reason to why the canal could be created across New York and therefore be a success. And just to cover those basic topics, I'm sure a lot of the audience that are tuning in are familiar with the canal. Construction began in 1817, completed in 1825. 363 miles, you're overcoming over 500 feet of elevation difference between Albany and Buffalo, Lake Erie to the Hudson River. And that ditch was 40 feet wide by 28 at the bottom, 4 feet deep, cost about $7 million. It's roughly just shy of $200 million today. A public works project on that scale coming in at that kind of a budget. If you try doing that today, I think it would be impossible. Not only to keep it within budget, but just that large scale of a project. And again, that covers the territory across New York State from Albany to Buffalo and the elevation changes. And there were those pre-canal transportation improvements that we need to look at, and how that kind of leads into the creation of the canal and what kind of impacts those have to begin with. So you have your waterway navigations, the use of the rivers, the natural rivers, the creeks, streams. You have a lot of portages though, so that takes a lot of time. So when they're talking about building a canal, that's one of those factors. The water in those rivers and creeks and those streams is all subject to natural occurrences, whether it's rain or drought. And just the amount of time, energy, and resources behind that become something that they want to overcome, that they want to have dominion over nature through use of an artificial man-made canal. And even the roads and stagecoach lines that are starting to be built, they become rutted, they're muddy messes. You could connect yourself, if you wanted to travel across New York, you could walk. That would take you weeks, and you'd have to encounter all of those other factors too, crossing over rivers, streams, creeks, ruddy messes. And probably if you're doing it by yourself and not carrying a lot, it probably was much more comfortable than trying to transport goods. So at this point in time, after the American Revolution, a lot of these Yankee migration is occurring, and you have goods that are trying to move west into these newly settled lands, although they were previously settled and used differently by the Native Americans, the Iroquois across New York State, having a completely different approach to land usage and environmental impacts, looking 7 generations ahead, as opposed to industry and commerce in 1,001 different directions. So I use this little illustration here and kind of make the comments, if you're traveling across New York State pre-canal and you're using one of these roads that's been cut across New York, probably formerly on an Iroquois trade trail or a walking path. Imagine you get an Uber ride and the storm kicks up and you still have to get out and push. You're still paying for your ride, but you have to get out and push. So they do improve upon those roads by use of plank roads or corridor roads. They create turnpikes. So not only you're having impact on the environment because you're creating a roadway, widening it out, you're taking down trees or other means, you're creating bridges, and the number of logs or planks. So you have that resource that you have to harvest the timbers for, you have the workforce coming through, and you have the draft animals that are coming through and providing an impact on the soil as well. So a lot of this, you can extrapolate a little bit further as we're talking about this impact and what it means to create an infrastructure across the state and how that really impacts the landscape. And leading up to the War of 1812, there's only a handful of these roads, these trails that are any real scale to them, but they are increasing as the need for transportation into the interior of the continent is occurring, as people are moving away from the coastlines and coming into new territories of the early republic. And that means those navigational improvements, the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company being formed in 1792 as a private stock company, and some well-known names, including Schuyler and other Mohawk Valley figures. And that operates only for a handful of years, and it wastes a lot of capital, a lot of resources. But they do create 3 short canals, one at Wood Creek, one at Little Falls, one at German Flats. And so instead of having to take that oxbow, you can just cut a short mile long or so canal. So there's an artificial waterway. So you're already impacting the natural flow of water. You're also impacting the wildlife and habitations in that area. But what it does do is it reduces transportation time, and it actually proves its worth so far as eliminating having the portage, or it reduces your travel time instead of taking almost an entire day to go around that oxbow with its other debris in the way, and to navigate on those Durham boats, those bateaux, that it proves its worth so that it helps lead to those additional improvements and that impact that we'll see. And here's an illustration of one of those river boats transporting. And so that's another thing. And Derek had mentioned one of the references in the article. So if you read that article that they're posted on the website or down in the description, it's one of those things that the doctor talks about in that work, is there's an impact because the increasing amount of river traffic and what will become an increased use of barges on the canal means that you can extrapolate that out toward the wood usage. Particularly for things like Durham boats, you have to have large trees, large standing timber to be able to fell, and to create those bows, you need to have, some of them will have sails, particularly when you connect in the Champlain Canal. Even during the Erie's era in the Champlain Canal, you have those lakers that will also go up in the Champlain or across the Great Lakes, and you need to have large timber that you'll harvest for those boats. And this is one of my favorite images of a wing dam in the river. And Christian Schultz, who had traveled in 1807, so Pre-canal is talking about those obstacles, and it says, 2 lines or ridges of stones generally constructed on sandy, gravelly, or stony shallows in such a manner as to form an acute angle where they meet, the extremities of which widen as they extend up the river, whilst at the lower end there is just space left to admit the presence of a boat. The water being collected, continuously pent up, causes a rise of the passage, which affords an easy passage over the shoal. So pre-Erie Canal, just like as the settlement is going across, the use of wing dams to bring up the water levels for navigation, there's already an environmental impact of that. You have human beings changing the natural flow of a river. So you can move forward a couple hundred years when we talk about the modern barge canal being on the Mohawk River in the eastern section, as that is a man-made change to a natural waterway. But human beings have been doing that for thousands of years, really, but across New York State for at least a few hundred years that they've been manipulating these natural waterways for navigation. So you have that as an impact on the rivers, water flow, movement of those stones, habitat for small species, fishways, etc. So this is all, these impacts are all things you kind of have to extrapolate just beyond. We don't have these, 1820s oil spills. There are spills in the canal later on. You can go through some of the historic newspapers and see where parts of the Erie have oil spills, or the lakes are being contaminated due to industry. But those early American views on nature, it's kind of, we're in this cusp in the early 1800s of the view toward nature is still this idyllic, beautiful scenery, but it's magnificent, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's sublime, according to DeWitt Clinton. But there's also a terror involved, the unknown. As you move into the frontier, you have what's portrayed as another race of human beings that are very savage, being the Native Americans, and you have animals that are unfamiliar. You have just the factors of weather conditions. If it's a drought season, you lose your crops. High winds, fire. So nature is viewed in these really juxtaposed positions where it is beautiful, and you want to go into nature and commune with God, to fearful of it. As kind of evidence, throw in a little bit of Thomas Cole anytime I can. There's Thomas Cole, the state site down in the Hudson Valley, and the Frederick Church historic site as well. But I have a few views of the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct, the remains of the aqueduct, as I referenced before, that there are only 6 of the 14 arches that remain. And to me, it's sort of like a Thomas Cole painting when I look out my office window. If you're familiar with Thomas Cole's Rise and Fall of Empire, where you see a man-made monolithic structure made of stone, kind of being slightly reclaimed by nature. It's a beautiful thing. So definitely come out and witness that for yourselves. Come out to the site. So again, they're being feared. They want to conquer. It's a testament to God's endowment to man. Across New York State, you have a geological advantage. People are pushing west. They want to conquer nature, but also still seem to embrace it. And by doing so, they have to dig the canal. So you have the blue line, the survey that goes across New York State. They're going to start that process. And early on, they're using local farmers. Contractors are going to start bidding section by section. They're going to create a ditch. It's got to be cut through the swamps, through rock, and over ravines, over streams and rivers. Forests need to be cleared. Areas need to be drained. Water needs to be diverted, because what is a canal without water? It's a ditch. So hydrology is a very large part of this. You need to make sure you have enough water for the system, particularly with those elevation differences. So you need to manipulate waterways. Sometimes you have too much water, and you need to create waste weirs, which will lead to stagnant pools, increase in things like mosquitoes and other flying insects or larvae, which can lead to other issues when it comes to diseases. So through the mire, through the rock, and across the state, hopefully some of the viewers recognize this area as the Montezuma Swamp. Familiar to you out in that area a little bit more in the greater Syracuse area. So there's a lot of really interesting things that I've come across where it talks about having to dig through this swamp, waiting till it's colder, waiting for the grounds to seize up, being able to have to cut ditches in order to divert water flow. So if nothing else, you're putting a canal through a swamp. That's a major impact, because if you want dry canal banks so they don't wash out, you have to put that water somewhere else. And then you have the other ecological impact too. Part of the Montezuma area now, if I recall, is a wildlife refuge. Wild birds in particular, people will traverse their way in to see the aqueduct and be able to take in nature along that way. It's a nice recreation, but also think about the fact that a lot of those habitats, that species, were there before the canal. So putting a canal through that space definitely had an impact. That being a 35-mile cut. And then you have things like the deep cut at Lockport, moving a great deal of that stone. The resources involved, just for the cranes to operate, the logistics behind it, the support of the men, and what they're going to need to cut that channel 7 miles long through the Lockport escarpment there.
Plus,
I'm not sure if this
mountains of stone there for like years afterwards, right?
Yeah. So it's a great undertaking. I'm not sure if that was the audio coming through on this one. I like to put some George Ward in my presentations if I can. So, and this is a device typically used for me to stop and take a sip of my coffee during a coffee break here. All right, so I did that. but it, it does become part of this folklore. All of us canal people will talk about, you know, uh, having to dig through the mud and the muck, or the mosquitoes. People ask a lot about uh, what that took, how many people might have died. And again, in a conversation like this, we're talking about the environmental history, and we're talking about the workforce. We don't have the same kind of records we would have if it had been done today. There isn't OSHA reporting hazards. You don't have an EPA. You don't have impact studies being done. So we don't have hard concrete numbers as to species that are impacted, or how many board feet of lumber might have been taken just for this. So it really is a lot more the concepts behind how creating a canal 300 plus miles across an entire state has an impact on that state's environmental landscape, as well as what that will lead to later. So that labor force, well over 3,000, you have draft animals. And so, just in and of themselves, building the canal and then the operation of the canal, horses and mules excrete up to about 20 pounds of manure every day. That's going someplace. You have the people that are going to be working along that, the logistical support and almost labor. They're going to need timber for the construction. They're going to need stone. They're also going to need that to cook, but they're going to need to eat and heat themselves. So a lot of that material around the canal is being built, or produce and other products having to come into the area. So that has to be transported as a logistical support. Just like we think about today, Derek's got a fantastic salt potato jersey on today. That material had to come from somewhere. It was shipped somewhere, and all of the factors behind that, from where it was, the materials are produced, to manufacturing, to where he got that. So those advantages so the creation of the Erie Canal is also this technological revolution. I think there's going to be some of the topics that might be brought up when it comes to the next program. Mentioning Dwight Clinton as a naturalist, but also Amos Eaton and a few of the others that lead to the establishment of engineering as civil engineering as an actual thing in not just New York State, but America. But a lot of those things, like the plow and scraper, those are being developed. You have a harder, sharper edge to be able to cut roots and to dig up the dirt to create that ditch. That's going to lead to easier use for farmers in agricultural impact. You have a tree feller for quick removal. The feller can pull over the trees, stumps can be pulled out. So you have essentially would take years to create large agricultural fields. Taking something that within a season or two, you can have a much larger, more productive agricultural footprint in an area. And that's not just in New York State, but that actually, as people are moving across into the Ohio Valley, into the Midwest, or it's taking that technology with them, and that's more the breadbasket of America, because this technology is also moving, these ideas are moving. And so you have this impact on the landscape in that way. You have forested areas that become fields for agriculture, and all this technology, this information moves with them. Being able to pull out the materials locally to create the hydraulic cement to set the masonry for the canal. These are all things that are coming out. And then you'll see also, just this land usage is changing. So Francis, taking the travel across New York, 1828, says as fast as half a dozen trees were cut down, a factory is raised up, and it looks as if the demon of machinery, having invaded the peaceful realms of nature, had fixed as the battleground on which they should strive for mastery. This again, it goes into that whole, you're using terminology like demon of machinery and the realms of nature, in which you're viewing this industrializing society, rapidly industrializing society, with all of its other connotations too. If you read something, there's about the amount of not well-mannered, the immoral happenings along the canal as well. You can kind of say that there's a different awakening that's going to be occurring when it comes to the religious, the moral aspect around the canal as well. But if nothing else, the view of this rapidly industrializing society sort of being controlled by the demon of machinery, and how that's really impacting nature. You have these pristine landscapes being transformed. These mills and factory towns are just popping up along the way. So there's water usage from the canal. You have not only the ability to transport on the canal, but the rivers, the streams and creeks. It's a very laissez-faire kind of approach by New York State government to allow people to use these. So you have water being diverted into the canal that can be mills be put upon it, and then water that needs to be off put, these waste spheres, so that there can be mills put on that. And they're just being allowed. These mills, can be built in these areas without any real restriction as to what they're doing or any real process behind that. So you have things like this tourist in 1829 complaining about how the drinking water set my bowels in uproar. And Hawthorne and several others commenting about the devastation and draining and rerouting of those waterways, just all across New York. And then also, the increase in the population, the increase of these mill towns, taking advantage of any other water source they could to power their factories. Folks coming from England, particularly Captain Hall, is talking about the murdered forest. He's coming from a location, parts of Europe, particularly in England, who no longer have these large standing timbers. One of the things leading into the American Revolution was actually where the British government had marked trees in New York and up into the Adirondacks or parts of the Catskills, that those are the king's trees because those are what they need for their boats, for their empire. So they no longer had that. That's one of the imperialistic motivations for any country to go out and settle or colonize other areas, because their natural resources that at home are so depleted that they need to go out. Kind of reminds you, we're past Independence Day now, but if you think about the movie Independence Day or any of the great movies about aliens coming into, they're looking for a resource, whether it's humans or the water. But that's very much, as these tourists are coming into New York to look at this grand canal that's been built, they're seeing along the way these murdered forests. Although canal has, yes.
Yeah, if I could, just you talking about deforestation here, it made me think about, and you also mentioned my salt potatoes jerseys. Obviously, Syracuse has the salt potato because of our booming salt industry, and I looked it up real quick. We had a guy write a book in 1842 from Syracuse, and to produce salt, which was one of the biggest products transported on the Erie Canal. And it boomed because of the Erie Canal. They were using 1,000 cords of wood a day to boil the salt away, which just, I think, speaks a little to your point there.
Absolutely. That seems like a very large number. That is a lot of wood.
Yeah.
I think that there is a curator talk about the salt industry
Yes.
that went up on YouTube that would be good for people to check out. And just the evaporation process on that, the resources, the burning of timber. Wow.
I thought I ought to mention that at some point.
Absolutely.
When I read that.
Right, and I think that we talk about the environment today and our carbon footprint, and really kind of put it in those numbers, and that's it was a large amount of salt, I'm sure, that was being produced, but maybe nothing on the scale of what kind of salt would be needed today for a population. So those transportation costs are driven way down, production goes way up. And again, the timber, grain, agricultural products, those minerals, salt. You beat me to it, Derek. No, it was great timing. So all of those raw materials are getting pulled out. You have finished goods, you have those manufacturers' goods coming in, furnishes, clothing, they're all being transported on there. We could, today it's a really hot topic about invasive species, zebra mussels in the waterway. One of the major environmental conversations around today's modern canal is that, from bilge pumps to other materials that can be being transported, we have boat stewards along the way, cleaning off your boats, your kayaks to limit invasive species. Weren't really topics that they were discussing as you start having materials, these raw goods going out to a global market. You have finished products, whether that's food, plants, other goods, and just even some of the boats themselves. A lot of these barges could hook a tow ride down the Hudson to New York Harbor, be around other seagoing vessels, and pick up some of these other species as well. And that Yankee migration really increased this movement of New Englanders to the interior of the continent. A lot of people can trace their lineage if they're an old family that, they might be living in Wisconsin now, but their family was from Rhode Island and they moved across New York State. Maybe they settled in New York for a little while. So those increases in the first decade of canal town populations, you have Albany increasing 96%, Utica jumps to almost 200%, Syracuse approaching a 300% increase, Buffalo at 314, and Rochester over 500%. Granted, a lot of these are, particularly on the western part of the state, Utica and beyond, they're smaller little towns, but just within that first 10 years, the amount of people that move into these areas and that impact that they're going to have on the resources and the landscape themselves and moving into these new areas. And in between the canal towns, there are still parts of the state that are, open fields or they are forests. So, that again, kind of, as you're traveling across New York State, must have been really eye-opening to see where you have the settlement, you get into a mill town, it's this hustle and bustle, and you have the sounds and the smells of industry and of a city, and then you go just a few miles out and there's birds in the trees and actually some trees still standing. So it probably made the devastated portions that much more stark in contrast to the pristine landscapes that could otherwise be seen in your travels across the state. So it really, again, emphasizes the civilization being brought into wilderness. And so now that people are able to see that, you can kind of get these references back to nature being like a temple, a place to commune with God. You start seeing that people are traveling into nature as an escape. They might be this hub of activity that's emerging in New York City as it becomes, this economic hub, this global trade. You start seeing people that will come up into the Catskills or up in the Finger Lakes or up into the Adirondacks as a way to get out of the city, particularly during the summer, and come in and kind of commune with nature and kind of get in touch with being a human again. So even though humanity has tamed the wilderness, but it really hasn't. I mean, we're still having to work with an artificial river, and you need to maintain that. So you have all of these horses and mules, oxen still having to pull barges, the excrement, the food that you need for them as well. That's all got an impact. And then you have things like the canal breaks, these washouts. You're diverting natural waterways and to create for this artificial one. But when the artificial waterway lets loose, you're flooding farmers' fields. The Canal Commission Fund is having to pay private landholders money for devastation. I should have used the really great image of the washout in Syracuse, right? I mean, could have really put that one in there. So you still have this grappling in the mind of an artificial waterway and natural waterways, and how you're really trying to transform for the benefit of humanity is the viewpoint, the landscape. And so a lot of those that cause disaster and delays as well. And then, of course, because the canal is such a success, it's going to be improved. It's going to be enlarged. It's going to be improved upon because it brought this economic success, because it's paid for itself in 10 years. And, it's just a monolithic human endeavor that is extremely successful. But as Emerson would have said, that it's part of a system, and therefore it's a machine, and it kills the human spirit and numbs it to nature. So as you are industrializing through nature and bringing civilization to nature, you no longer really have a concept of what nature is and what your natural landscape is. You've changed it so much that you have a new, view on reality. It did enliven the state and expanded the union, and it helped to spread the population and culture. And it kind of really not just creates the empire state here in New York, but it really does help for the success of the early republic and the establishment of a national identity in America. And again, that all really comes down to water. You need to divert the water. You need feeders to supply it, waste weirs for overrun. You need that for locking through your barges. Aqueducts, whether it's in Rochester or it's Montezuma or it's over the Schoharie Creek, need to be created, culverts, all to change the natural course of waterways. Again, an aqueduct over the Mohawk River at Rexford. You need to create a feeder canal to divert water from the river to the canal, and those locks in order to lock through your barges. And I'm going to bring this up too, the Adirondack connection. The Yankee migration that changed the face of New England, and by the first couple decades of the canal, nearly 50% of Vermonters had moved west across New York, either into parts of western New York or into the Great Lakes area, which abandons their farms, agriculture. It didn't turn to dairy, it turned to dairy and sheep because of the rough terrain and the reforestation of pastures. So it's this part of that, as I mentioned before with Thomas Cole's paintings, where nature, well, I'll quote Jurassic Park, nature will find a way. The reforestation, if you go hiking in a lot of areas and you see a stone wall, that is where a field used to be, despite the number of trees around you. So by the 1870s and 1880s, they start noticing these water levels, not only in the canal, but in the Hudson River, which impacts directly money. Water levels are dropping in the Hudson and the canal, so they realize there's something going on. And that has a lot to do with the environmental impact that's going on in the Adirondack Park. So a campaign begins to preserve the northern wilderness, which would be known as an Adirondack Park, which sets it up to that wilderness needs to ensure a regulated water supply for the rivers and canals. So you have in the Adirondacks scenes like this with, like we talk about deforestation and timber harvesting. There's also a great deal of minerals and ore, iron ore in particular, that's being harvested from the Adirondacks. And because there's cutting all this timber, that affects the watershed. That water will run off. It doesn't absorb properly, which means it doesn't dissipate properly into the feeder streams and into things like the Mohawk River or the watershed, into the Hudson River. So people start noticing that. It's actually one of the reasons why the Adirondack Park was created, because it's money, particularly those merchants or those business owners in New York City advocate for the creation of the protected wildlife or protected wildlands of the Adirondacks. And it's also becomes, during this era, a major hub for people to commune with nature. You have a lot of people that are actually taking the railroads up the Hudson Valley into the Adirondacks for their great lodges, their camps. So that's that they're trying to protect nature economically and for their own recreation. And then today's modern barge canal, so by the 1890s, it's on track to be constructed. They want to compete with other canals from Canada. There's the talk of Panama Canal. They really want, particularly as you get into the early 20th century, Governor Teddy Roosevelt really wants to compete on a global scale with other countries by modernizing the canal across New York. And at that point, technological advances such as the steam shovel, they're going to cut a new channel in certain areas. They're going to use natural waterways like Oneida Lake, and they're going to canalize the Mohawk River. So instead of having an artificial river, they're going to have a man-manipulated natural river that they're going to put dams in. They're going to dredge and otherwise change the way that the river flows by eliminating some of the islands, creating other islands for the purpose of the canal. And you can see that again, will connect Albany to Buffalo with some of the changes, particularly in this area, in the central area, where they're using actual lakes and waterways, because you have a new mode of propulsion for those barges. You're not going to have mules or horses. You're going to be using engines, and that has a whole different carbon footprint as well. So you have these iconic scenes transforming. Here, this is Little Falls. From this to this around Albany, where you have Albany, the Port of Albany, being one of the largest wood yards in the world because of that timber that's going to be coming across New York State and also down the Champlain from the Adirondacks. And it puts it toward this. So you have the Erie Canal being filled in So this is the old canal, Erie Boulevard in North Albany. I'm sure there's several images out there of what it looked like in the Syracuse area as they were filling in the canal, sort of as a dumping ground. And it's a kind of a disappointing image here. But that construction of the barge canal also transforms people's connection to not just an artificial waterway, but to the natural river, particularly in the eastern section of the Mohawk River. In this era, you have the canal goes into the river. Shortly thereafter, you have further development of routes 5 and 5S. And by the 1950s, you have the Eisenhower Interstate System, which creates New York State Thruway. So now with that, combined with 4 to 6 lines of railroad for the traveling through the Mohawk Valley, particularly through that narrow gap because of that geological advantage, it really cuts people off from that aspect of nature of a natural waterway. It's a modified river now. There's dams, there's locks. So people no longer have that sense of connection to that part of the natural landscape across New York. But there's some strides toward remedying that. The historic canal today being mostly a recreational way, although there is an increase in commerce. And that's all kind of due to this Constitutional Convention in New York State in 1967 that unanimously voted Article 8, Section 3 to protect and conserve the natural resources, scenic beauty of the state as they are important public objectives. So while we may not see those large oil tankers coming through the canal any longer, the canalway is part of the natural beauty, scenic beauty of the state. It's an important public objective. And the preserve across New York for that wilderness characteristic. The recreation way is created in the 90s to kind of go along with some of these other parks, these trails, the recreational ways. I know that Derek has mentioned in a program he did for the Jervis Library as they're celebrating their 125th anniversary about the Canalway Challenge and some of these things so that people can get back out there along the canal in whatever way that you can connect with nature through the parks along these trails. While we can showcase fascinating history, we also try to showcase the natural beauty as nature's kind of coming back in some of these areas. Obviously, across New York, we are not as industrial as we were during the zenith of the Erie Canal or the early 20th century. So you can come out to sites like Schoharie Crossing and walk our towpath any time of the year. You can ride your bike on the canalway. You can come check out remnants of the old enlarged Erie Canal. Check out, this is Empire Lock. This is almost sort of the infomercial part of my program where I try to convince you to come on out because there is plenty to see at Schoharie Crossing, the remnants of the aqueduct. You come out to paddle in Schoharie Creek when the water levels are appropriate. And you can kind of see, as I referenced before, Thomas Cole's paintings. This is kind of harkens into that as well. So you see this amazing stone structure standing amidst the water, standing amidst with the wetlands that are around it as well, and the trees coming up. The new Erie Canal, that Constitutional Convention again of '91, instead, because New York State likes to take a look at their Constitution every once in a while, changing things around. Put underneath the Thruway Authority, that has since changed since I created this PowerPoint. It's underneath the Power Authority now, New York State Power Authority. They're calling it the Erie Canal. Cargo has increased, particularly in the last few years, but it is still seen as a recreational pathway. So people can get out there and enjoy themselves along nature, either by walking, biking, boating, checking out a few of the historic locations along the way, or listen to some music. See, this is definitely the ad promo in my presentation. And the public water supply that NYPA's, with their new approach toward the canal of supplying feeders for reservoirs to drinking water in the western part, and particularly in the Mohawk Valley, near the Scotia to Schenectady area, they do help supply public water by pooling water up that is also used for the canal, and they can create these hydro facilities along the canal as well. So while there's been a lot of ecological impacts because of a canalized waterway, an artificial waterway, and those dramatic changes to the landscape, we are seeing more and more usage of today's canal system and a more best way to phrase this, in more environmentally conscious way in order to bring up, you know, hydroelectricity or other such things as the water supply or reservoirs. And that's mostly an impact for, as 2010 indicated, you have a great deal of the population of New York State being within 20 miles of within the canal system of New York State, whether it's across the Mohawk Valley and into the central and western New York, or down the Hudson Valley and up into the Champlain. A lot of us are impacted directly by what the canal system does today, as well as what it has done in the last 200 years. A nice aerial view of Schoharie Crossing in the 1950s, and kind of put that in context of what it would look like for 2015. Timber usage is down, so a lot of our tree lines are really growing back. And I really do appreciate Derek inviting me to come be a part of this program. And I guess you ran out of some of the best people. I referenced Tom Grasso's great program earlier on. You've had some wonderful presenters on here, and I just want to kind of finish up with a little bit of a statement that there's a part in here I think Tom would kind of agree with, hopefully. The Erie Canal being forged across an ideal landscape to overcome nature and cut a waterway through wilderness, and that waterway had allowed for great success to New York and the country. But if we all, again, put ourselves in this framework of mind, that we look at the Erie Canal and ecology together, we can kind of hearken into what the environmentalist Roderick Nash would say, that land and life is a complex organism functioning through interaction of its components, and that we can fully conceive nature as an intricate web of interdependent parts and a myriad of cogs and wheels, each essential to the healthy operation of the whole. And I'll say that while at times it seems like some of those wheels, we all need to kind of grease the wheels and clean those cogs every once in a while. Each of them have a role. And although humans have sought to correct what they saw as those squeaky wheels, and New Yorkers in the early era in particular had dug deep to clear a path to the future with enterprise, ingenuity, and some environmental devastation across God's canvas along the way. But they painted an industrialized civilization that prospered. The canalway was enough of a success to essentially work itself out of its original purpose by fostering the advancement of other technologies such as a railroad system, providing transportation. That all meant that businesses as well as people could have security and stability. And again, I think this is part where Tom Grasso might agree, is that also environmental historian Michael Hyman points out that the Erie Canal is the closest that civilization and nature have grown together in their struggle to be apart. And although it's all part of a system, Thoreau also notes that the interconnectedness of humanity, the trade, the economy, it's all rooted in the soil. It's all rooted in the substances of life. And that all means that we are attached to Earth. And so we all should take a look at the world around us. We've traveled quite a bit across the world as a species. We've scarred the landscape, but we all still have roots within the earth, whether it's the materials in Derek's shirt, it's the food that we eat, the coffee that we drink, the materials that go in the technology that we are using today to come across through Facebook Live. It connects us all, and we all need to be aware of that. So I hope that you enjoy the program. And again, thank you to the Erie Canal Museum and to Derek for inviting me to be a part of this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you, David. That was great. If anyone has any questions, please ask them in the comments. Let's just check out the comments here. I noticed Vicky, she mentioned that the pepperidge tree went extinct in central New York thanks to the salt industry as well. Just a little fun fact there. But this was really fascinating. Reminds me a lot of Bill Cronin, one of my favorite historians. All his stuff about how New England was changed dramatically by industrialization. But we'll give it another minute or two, see if people have questions.
And we have some other things going on with Schoharie Crossing. I'll just quickly mention, you always check us out on Facebook. Look at our New York State Parks website. Facebook's probably the easiest when it comes to events and programs. It's much more quick for us to keep people updated through that way. We have a book club for the month of August. It's going to be our first try at a virtual book club, and we're featuring the 2016 release Heaven's Ditch, God, Gold, and Murder on the Erie Canal by Jack Kelly. We're going to do weekly check-ins on that, roughly 60 pages a week to get through the book. It'll be a month-long program, and he's going to give us a presentation on September 2nd, answering any questions people have about the book, talking about his process and the book that he's working on that'll be released next year.
I might just have to join that club, David, because I have sadly not read the book yet, and I've been meaning to. So,
well, I believe you have some in the gift shop right there. You
yes.
Pick up a copy, or the local libraries. They're starting to reopen, so grab a copy of it. Read along with us in August. Like I said, we'll take questions during that month, and Jack has been kind enough to supply us with some commentary throughout the book about some additional information that he covers.
Oh, that's great. But I'm not seeing any. Someone wants to know when will the visitor center open at Schoharie Crossing?
We're looking at the 22nd of July. We're going to open back up, but it is going to be by appointment only for the exhibit and also for tours. So the contact information up on the screen, you can give us a call. You can send us an email if you want. That's schohariecrossing@parks.ny.gov. We're going to start having to take those by appointment for people to come in. And then hopefully as things go on and we go through these phases a little bit more, we'll be able to open up a little bit more permanently. So.
All right. Well, awesome. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, and thank you folks for watching. Have a good day.